It seems at the moment I'm recording a lot of videos out here. I will need to get inside shortly. So this video is called It's Worse Than That, It's Dead Jim. All will be revealed shortly. But first we have to do the parish notices. So, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, can I ask why you haven't? Please subscribe. Hit the subscribe icon. If you want to be notified when stuff like this hits the channel, that's the big thumbs up. Oh, sorry, no, it's not the thumbs up, it's the bell icon. Get it right, John. And if you want to, if you like the contents of this video, please give it a big thumbs up. It really helps with the good old YouTube algorithm. Somewhere down there is the TMG community link, as are the Instagram and Facebook page links. So please go over to Instagram and Facebook and tag me there, because then you'll be notified about some of the other stuff that's going to be going on. And I know I keep saying that, but things are starting to happen. But now back to the video. Ooh. Okay, when I jumped off the worktop a minute ago to stop the video and start it again, I managed to catch my foot and it's smarting a bit. And you're probably asking why I'm in such a jovial mood. I should be in a foul mood, and I really should be in a foul mood, but I've just decided that life is what it is. And for me, it might be completely rubbish at the moment, and I might be penniless, but I am actually quite happy. But that's a different question. So, what the hell am I talking about when I turn around and say, you know, it's dead, Jim? Well, and it sounds, you know, it sounds like a daft question, but this is all to do with what happens when your synth reports low battery. Why am I talking about low battery? Well, I get asked a lot on the channel about batteries. And I think one of the things that sort of is really interesting about keyboard players is you're either a keyboard player like me, who is interested in the technology, likes to sort of maintain their synths, doesn't feel too reticent about getting the screwdriver out, taking the back off, and you know, and doing some of this maintenance work themselves. But then I've got friends who play keyboards and they are fantastic keyboard players. But if you ask them to actually open a keyboard up, they would just look at you absolutely blankly, because their forte is to play the thing, not to maintain the thing, which is probably why they're a much better keyboard player than I am. But I know many keyboard players can play the nuts out of the keyboard. They really can. I mean, you know, I've got friends who really can do this. They are absolutely fantastic. They can play organs and pianos and synths and pads, and they are absolutely brilliant. They can just about work out how to sort of set sounds up, set combis up, set lists up. But that kind of is about where it stops. In front of an audience, they make things look easy. And, you know, before loads of you pile in and say, well, you know, I know how my keyboard works. I'm sure you do, and this is not about that at all. It really is about the many who don't know how a keyboard works. Now, if you follow my channel, if you're sitting here because you follow the channel, you've received the link, and you're watching this video, then it's possible that you are into old keyboards. And if you're into old keyboards, you know what I say about old keyboards. You get a lot of bang for your buck. You know, an old D70 or an old Yamaha VL50 or a Korg Triton, for argument's sake. These were expensive machines when they were bought. You know, some of these machines, the first owner would have paid $1,000, maybe $2,000 to acquire. If you look at my Oasis, okay, that was an $8,000 machine, brand new. It's not worth that now, but that's what it was brand new. It was so revolutionary that they could get away with charging that sort of money for that machine. But now you can dip into the market and you can pick these things up for, you know, £200 to £500. That's a lot of synthesizer for not a lot of money. And these things, they don't... All right, I'm going to caveat that. Maybe the sounds do age some, but, you know, sometimes the sound you want is that sound, especially if if you're an Espencraft, for argument's sake. Espencraft is Mr. 80s. Like, that's what he does. He does 80s synth pop. So what does he use to do 80s synth pop? 80s synths. Why wouldn't you do that? So owning a legacy synthesizer also brings a maintenance commitment. So you can't just go and buy one of these things and expect it to work flawlessly for a period of time. They're getting old and you're going to have to maintain them. And my experience is these legacy keyboards, as long as they have not been abused, will service you for many, many years to come. They really will. And as long as you don't abuse them, don't press the buttons too hard, you know, play the keys all right, you know, don't hit the things with a sledgehammer, pour a pint of Coke in the keyboard, you will have many years of joyful playing out of one of these things. But these keyboards are old and they will go wrong. And what typically goes wrong on one of these keyboards is a dead battery. The subject of this rant. Tact switches, which are the switches that sit underneath the plastic bits you press on the top of them. Rotary controls, anything you turn. Key contacts, the bits underneath the key that actually make the electrical contact. And power supplies, amount of power supplies that go wrong purely because of the age. And I can probably attest that these are primarily what I end up replacing when I buy a keyboard or when a keyboard is given to me. Okay, I tend to go through this ritual of going through the keyboards. It's one of the reasons why the SY77 hasn't appeared on screen yet, and also why the EPS16 is still sitting over there waiting for me to actually get around to giving it some TLC, because it needs stuff doing before I can actually properly demonstrate the machines. So this is the point that I can actually use. It's worse than that. It's dead, Jim. I've never been able to use that in a video. I'm quite pleased about that. But this is where the battery comes in, because if your battery dies, your synth will pretty much die, especially on the legacy stuff. Okay, maybe on the more modern stuff, you know, the chip technology has moved on, but definitely on the legacy stuff, if the battery dies, the synth dies. You'll get somewhere, you'll switch it on, and you'll have nothing. Okay, these legacy synths weren't designed to hold sounds in memory because of the way the circuitry was designed and where we were in the electronics development effectively. So if your synth is reporting low battery, then you need to start thinking about backing it up. And I say that quite seriously, because if you have developed custom sounds and set lists and stuff like that that you use, if that battery dies, you're gonna lose it. There is no if, buts, or maybe. So this is where you need to understand how the backup of your synth works. Basically, if you ignore a message like this, and you're likely to switch off the synth and then switch it on to find nothingness, all that hard work will be gone. And I've done it myself. I've been guilty of this, okay? I've ignored the low battery light, the low battery message for far too long, and then I've come one day to switch the synth on and it's dead as a doorknob. And this is what I mean by if the battery dies, the synth dies. Okay, so many of you are going to say, what actually does the battery do in the synthesizer? You know, I've noticed synthesizers have battery, but what actually does this thing do? So, depending on what country you live in, obviously dictates what voltage the main supply. So I live in a 240 volt country, so 240 volts arrive at my synth normally in the style of a kettle lead plugged into the back of it, especially for the legacy stuff. The newer stuff, we tend to have some sort of power supply that transforms the voltage down, but in the legacy stuff, most of the time there is a 240 volt supply into the back of it, and then in the back of the machine there is a power transformer that transforms the voltage down from 240 volts to typically what the synth can operate at. Now, most synths, the logic side of the synth is probably going to be operating at 5 volts, and the audio generation side of the synth will probably operate at plus or minus 12 volts. And if you ever look at power supply, quite often you'll see written on the power supply all the voltages that the power supply is supplying, and typically it could be plus or minus 15 volts instead of 12 volts. It could be 3 volts instead of 5 volts, but you know, typically it's somewhere around there for these things. And that's the reason why you'll see multiple wires running off the secondary side, which is the low voltage side of the transformer. So when you unplug the synth from power, the voltage on any of the circuitry is lost. There's nothing in there that actually maintains 5 volts to the logic board. And the logic board is where all the sound generation is held. Okay, it's held on the logic board in some of the chips. Now, some of the chips will be ROM chips. Now, they may hold the sounds all the time. Okay, and the FB01 is a really good example of that in terms of the sounds on the FB01 are actually held in a ROM chip. So that if you ever want to do a factory restore, you just restore it from the ROM chip. But not a lot of other synthesizers of that age worked like that. Typically, the chips were quite volatile, and therefore, when you cut the power to the chips, they reset themselves to a base state. So that could be all the switches on, or all the switches off, or some combination in between. But that's what happens when you power off the circuitry, and why on a lot of synths, you know, it takes a while for things to boot up, because they could be loading things in from ROM chips, or they could be loading things in from a floppy disk drive, for argument's sake, on a sampler. So this means that anything that's in those chips when you turn the power off is also lost. So what the battery does in a synthesizer is the battery maintains onto one leg of these various chips a permanent voltage, right? Which means that these chips retain the state they were at when you switched the power off. And if you go and look inside a synthesizer, if you've watched the channel, you've watched me open up synths and modules and what have you, you will quite often see the battery that's been put inside, or I will point it out quite typically what the battery is that's been put inside the particular machine. Most of the major manufacturers, definitely during the 80s, went over to coin cell technology. So these are the little coin cells, about yay thick, very silver, lithium ion typically. But they went over to that sort of technology, long life batteries, the sort of thing, if you're thinking about it, sort of thing you find in your car key fob. Okay, they're the batteries that a lot of these manufacturers put inside these synthesizers. But they also put in these small barrel type batteries. And I can't think of anything I've got off the top of my head. I'm sure I have got something with a barrel battery in it. I can't think what it is. But there were certain manufacturers that put in these barrel batteries, and effectively they're sort of like, if I were to grab a battery from here, they're sort of slightly smaller than that, which is a AA style battery, but thicker, but not as thick as that, which is a C-type battery. Okay, but they were little barrel batteries, and typically they would have solder tags onto either end. So somebody would have spot welded a solder tag on each end so that you could solder it into the board. And some manufacturers did that with the coin cell batteries as well. So Yamaha would typically do that. In fact, I don't think I've got Yamaha Synth that I have bought and haven't done a conversion on over the years. Every synth I've ever bought that is Yamaha that has these coin cell batteries with tags on, I tend to replace them with a battery holder so that it's easier to get the battery in and out for the next change, rather than having to get the soldering iron out. The batteries come in various ratings, depending on how the manufacturers design the board. So typically between 3 and 5 volts, and if they are soldered, you have to solder them into the board. But the important thing is that when these batteries are connected into the circuit, they maintain the logic chips that hold your sounds and set lists and all the other stuff. Okay. Now, there's normally a tolerance in the battery supply. So, for argument's sake, a CR2032 battery, which is sort of the standard coin cell battery that a lot of manufacturers have used, runs at about 3.2 volts. Now, the circuitry inside that particular synth is quite happy to operate on, say, 2.8 volts. So there is a bit of tolerance in there for the battery to sort of slowly die. And the other thing to bear in mind, guys, is if something has been in storage for a long period of time, it is likely that that battery will be draining quicker than something that you switch on and off every day. Okay, so just bear that in mind. So before you put things into storage, which is my personal preference, I will normally swap the battery or put a new battery in, just to make sure that if it's going to go in for an extended period of time, I know when it comes out it's still going to work. But as I say, there's normally some sort of tolerance in there, and if the voltage from the battery breaches that tolerance, then your settings are lost. So you kind of need to be very mindful of the fact that you have a low battery message. And a low battery, I'll give you another example. A DX7, okay, takes a 3.2 volt battery, which is a 2032 battery with solder tags on it. At 3 volts, it gives you the low battery warning. At 2.8 volts, you will lose the settings. So, what am I saying? I'm saying, if you've got a legacy piece of tech, learn how to back it up. If you've got to use SysX, learn how to do that. Learn how to set your computer up. Take regular backups, especially if you alter settings. So if you create new sounds or you create new set lists for whatever you're doing, take a backup. When you receive a low battery error message, change the battery or book it in with a technician to get the battery changed. Because if you don't, you do run the risk of switching it on one day and it could be completely dead. And on that note, I'm going to say, live long and prosper. Bye-bye.